I don't know. I'm just being silly. But I'm just giving you a heads up. The camera's right here. No. Welcome to Stadium. COVID mic.
Yep.
Actually, I had this way before COVID, and then they, got in sparse supply. But yeah, and I once tried taking these off to like screw it in. You'll never get it back on.
I have.
The same way. Yeah?
It took me probably like half an hour and like
stuff clergy were not designed for that.
So if I start mumbling or singing during the thing, it's going to pick me up.
Just chew with your mouth closed, and I think we'll be fine. Nice to meet you. Oh no! Oh, come on. Ugh. So close.
Now, I have to.
All right. I'll be back.
I was like, exactly. Oh, and I initially so at the end of the season, I kept that end of the season. I'd love to see it. I was like, this year, there's a team that's making I'm not just I would have said it even before everything happened, but it'd be special. They'll be good for a long time. So I'm not chances. Vegas. Bengals are going to Vegas. Some of it also kind of depends on at least for the moment, the Bengals have the best chance. Not a great passer. I'll take the Bengals in the second round.
Okay, take two.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, good morning. If you're getting food, please continue getting food. I want to welcome each of you here this morning. I am still floating from yesterday evening and from cutting together and getting to share my Rabbi, Perlin, with all of you, which I've so been looking forward to. So this morning, when we were thinking of this, I wanted to have the chance to eat together and at the same time study together. And I was reminded of confirmation class at Temple B'nai Shalom in Fairfax Station, Virginia, where we had food, and Rabbi Perlin would say that in Olam Haba, in the world to come, it was going to be an all-you-can-eat buffet. And confirmation class was on this earth the closest we were going to come to Olam Haba. And so I wanted to have that experience together this morning. So please feel free to get seconds, to get up, to continue eating. It's our taste of the world to come together. And the only thing we'll ask is that we want to really remain focused on our learning together in the program rather than chatting at the buffet table as well. And I also want to just invite everyone to take a peek at your cell phone and make sure that it's silenced so we can really be fully present together. So I will keep my introduction briefer than last night, but I want again to introduce to all of you my rabbi, Amy Perlin. She was the first woman rabbi to start a congregation, and was also one of the first women rabbis to become senior rabbi. She was ordained in 1982 and founded Temple B'nai Shalom in 1986, where my family was from before I can remember, and where I had the privilege of growing up and feeling the vibrancy of Jewish community and synagogue life. Rabbi Perlin is also not only a rabbi, but truly a scholar and a historian and someone who's very much involved in, has long been and continues to be very involved in the Jewish world in general, in the Reform movement, and tapped into the trends, the history as well as the current trends and what's really afoot in the Jewish world, what's ahead. She is on the board of governors of the Hebrew Union College, where she heads the Israel Committee. And so I am so excited to not only get to share the spirituality of yesterday evening, but also the learning opportunities that we have this weekend. So I am going to leave it to that because we're here to learn from Rabbi Perlin. Welcome, Rabbi Perlin.
Thank you so much. We're going to start with our blessing for study. And here is Rabbi Siegel's confirmation picture, just because I can do it, right? But it's really important for us to say the blessing for study whenever we study. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things about Jewish tradition. Torah isn't just what's in the Ark. It isn't just what we teach from the biblical text. Torah is every time we are engaged in learning. And it doesn't matter who your starting partner is. The tradition teaches us when you study with somebody, you're studying with the face of God. So I thank all of you, all the faces of God this morning, for getting up and joining together so that we can learn. So we'll say the bracha together. Now you all have handouts. I want everybody to be able to learn in all the modalities. You can look at the screen or look at your handout, but the bracha is only up here because I wanted to show the confirmation picture. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher qidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Amen. Zach? So our theme for the weekend that I was given was the old will be made new and the new will be made holy. A quote by dear Rob Cook. And I want you to know that what Rob Cook would tell you is that when you come into a synagogue and you are not the Rav of the synagogue, you teach Lichvod HaRav. Lichvod HaRav can have two different meanings. One, you teach, the rabbi has given you the honor of sharing your words because it is the rabbi's community. And since you have two magnificent rabbis, I teach this morning Lichvod HaRabot in honor of Rabbi Siegel and Rabbi Propel. And Lichvod HaChazan because he's so charming and wonderful. And so I teach in their honor and by their invitation. So let's take a look at this picture. Rob Cook would be not dressed necessarily for Phoenix, but his quote is really important. Let's think about this for a second. The old shall be made new. The importance of that for the Jewish people can't be underscored, because we are an ancient people, and we have only survived because we adapt. In biology, for those of you who are biologists, there are 3 principles of biology. You adapt, you migrate, or you die. And Jews have adapted. We are great adapters. And we have migrated. And sadly, in some communities, not by choice, we have died. And so our job is to really look at the fact that we take what's old, and it is our obligation to adapt it. And then to make that adaptation holy. So we are the process. We are those who will continue the Jewish people. I stand here this morning with humility. For 40 years, I have been studying the evolution of the synagogue. And I've been teaching about the evolution of the synagogue. And I've never entitled my lecture the way I titled it for you. If you look at the title at the top of your sheet, it says, "Is it still the institution of Jewish survival?" For 40 years, I would have lectured, "The synagogue is the institution of Jewish survival," a declarative statement. We are living, some say in a liminal moment, in a moment of paradigm shift, in a transitional moment, not only in the Jewish world, but in the world at large. Every time we face these transitional moments, the synagogue is challenged. I've lived through many challenges in the course of my 40-plus year career. I won't go into how many years that is, but it's really important for us to understand that change and adaptation is part of all of that. But for the first time in all my years, we're asking questions about the institution of the synagogue. So I'm going to make a confession. I decided I would ask the question and let you become the next group to inform my research. So together we're going to be a laboratory this morning. Let me take you through the evolution of the synagogue that we are in right now. In Exodus, chapter 25, verse 8, which happened to be my older son's bar mitzvah portion, we read, "V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham." Make me a sanctuary and I shall dwell among them. So what is the purpose of the initial sacred space? God needs a house. Then we're in the wilderness and we build a tabernacle, a mishkan, because we need a place for God to dwell. And then we build a temple, mikdash, from the word for holiness, again, a house of God. But something happens. People need more. After the destruction of the temple, no more sacrifices. Judaism goes through a major shift. And even while the temple was in existence, we know that there were proto-synagogues, especially in northern Israel. Imagine if you lived in northern Israel, days and days journey just to make a sacrifice in Jerusalem. A group of people, not unlike yourselves, would say, why should we schlep? Let's do it here. So we know we have places all through Israel. I'm going to show you where all of a sudden Israelites decided to gather. From the proto-synagogues, we went to the synagogue. Synagogue being a Greek word. It's an architectural structure that was a place for prayer, study, and communal gathering. And then the synagogue becomes the institution of Jewish survival. No doubt, we can prove that. Now, you're Temple High, so you have to ask me the question, well, when did we start using the word temple, Rabbi? And the answer to that is really an American phenomenon. Isaac Mayer Wise believed that this was the new Zion, and the Reform movement said we're never going to sort of yearn for a new temple in Jerusalem. I mean, after all, we have barbecues here. We don't need a temple in Jerusalem. So what we'll do is we will call the temple, the synagogue, the temple. That's going to be a sort of a cultural statement. And we are all going to be a kingdom of priests, a holy people. All right, next. So these are the original tabernacles. The one on the left is the tabernacle from the Torah that we read about. The one on the right is what we think that the temple looked like and the Temple Mount. And they were houses for God. Now, if I took you on a tour of the world and you saw cathedrals, which are built as houses for God, what do we know about the architecture of God's house? Okay, in Judaism, the ark is going to face east. Tell me about the ceiling in God's house. Cathedrals. Very high. Temple Emmanuel in New York. The synagogue in San Francisco, where my friends the singers are, where they have a 3-story bima. I could never serve there. I would be this big. So, God is in his holy temple, and we make a big, high ceiling, impossible to heat, impossible to maintain. We have people here from Cincinnati, and Plum Street Synagogue, the rabbi is also a friend of mine. He has to get up on a ladder and change thousands of light bulbs. So we built buildings that were hard to maintain, hard to heat, but God was in his holy temple, and the ceiling was high to make us feel the presence of God. This is one of my favorite proto-synagogues. I take people there when I take trips to Israel. It is Baram. It's on the border of Lebanon, and it is a synagogue from the rabbinic period. I have a poster in my office in 1958, from 1958, where it was basically underground. And the Israel government has excavated the synagogue. This is one of the first buildings that we still have, and there are a number in northern Israel that were built for Jews to get together. Now, they didn't do sacrifices. There are benches. They prayed, they studied, and they hung out. This is the first time in around the 3rd century when what you and I are doing was being born. Think about it. They made a change in the 3rd century, and we're still living with that change. So I have taken groups to Baram, and we pray there, and it's been magical. I once did a healing service in this building, and I wept through the whole thing. It was so powerful. So even if your ceiling is low, and even if you're getting together, you bring God in a variety of ways. And sometimes that's through connection and gathering. So this synagogue, starting in the 3rd century, becomes a place of gathering. Beyond a physical structure, what does the synagogue represent? And why has it historically been the premier institution of Jewish survival, even more than the Jewish family? Anybody want to posit a guess?
It houses the Torah.
Okay. So many of the things we need to be functional Jews are located at the synagogue. What else? There are no wrong answers. You can be brave. I will love you, even if you try. Yes?
It was the center of the community. You had places to bake because not every house could afford or have an oven. You had a place for ritual cleanliness, the mikvah, and you had a place to clean.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know why we don't call it like the schmoozagog. But that is really, really important. Community is important. What we learned early on in those first centuries is people didn't want to do religion alone. They really wanted, and think about it, the sacrificial cult was a very isolating thing. You know, you brought your lamb, you got your shekel. It wasn't really a communal experience. There was a hand here.
It was community as well.
Community. And think about that. So what I want you to think about throughout the lesson, and write all over your pieces of paper, and if you have questions, write there too, because we'll answer as many as we can. I want you to think about the elements of a healthy community or a synagogue. Yes?
Couldn't you also say it was a shelter and a fortress?
Absolutely.
For security.
Yeah, interesting. I wrote my rabbinic thesis on the Torah service of the Torah. Almost until the modern period, the Torah did not dwell in the synagogue. People had to take it home because synagogues were raided and there was so much anti-Semitism that they were afraid they'd be robbed or they'd be burned. And so there's all this Jewish law surrounding who takes the Torah home. So when my synagogue didn't have a building for 9 years, I carried our Torah in a golf bag. And I brought it to people's houses, and we did bar mitzvah rehearsals on people's dining room tables. And when I went out of town, people babysat for the Torah. And when the Torah went to the synagogue, my boys cried. They said the Torah's going to be all alone. No one will take care of it. And what will happen if something happens to the synagogue? We know that we're living in safety by the fact that you have a permanent ark and Torahs that reside in it. Because in most shtetl synagogues and in most early and proto-synagogues, the ark was portable. Remember, in the Torah, the ark was portable. Yeah. Okay, yes?
I think there's also an aura to it. There's something spiritual about walking into a sanctuary, at least for me.
I agree, I feel it. And we'll see at the end of the presentation, the last survey in 2020 actually totally agrees with you. So there is something special about sacred space and the words that people put over their arks. My husband and I go to synagogues wherever we are in the world, and we've been to 7 continents, and I study the name. What are people writing over their ark? What is their identity? Okay, now you can look at your sheets, or if you prefer to look at the small letters there. So this was originally not going to be a PowerPoint up on the wall, but when we heard how many people were coming, I decided to put it on the screen. So I thought it would be important to take you on a journey to, and this is all new research material, part of something that I'm working on. So as I was studying, I found some material on the Middle Ages. And I think it's really important we forget. We sometimes talk about the Torah, and we talk about, what synagogues were like in suburban 1950s. But how did that transition happen? When were we allowed to eat in a synagogue? Early synagogues, you couldn't have had breakfast. When was the first time Jews started eating in a synagogue? When was the first time women and children were welcome in a synagogue? Questions that I've been asking because I want to see this trajectory. If we look at the history, we can see what is old that we want to make new. And what has had its time, and it's time for it to go. So I found this wonderful scholar from Israel who is writing about the medieval Jewish community. And would somebody do me the honor of reading? Thank you. Oh, Rabbi Siegel, I love you so much. For the people who...
Just looking with it in order.
This research.
This research aims to explore the main institution, the synagogue, in this specific Jewish community in order to understand the mechanism that helped them to survive. The qualitative uniqueness of the synagogue institution in these Jewish communities is that it constitutes an integral institution. In addition to being the daily group's primary worship institution, the synagogue is also its primary social one.
Right, the schmoozing. Okay, thank you, because that's such an important part. Okay, you can skip to the bottom. Now we're talking about northern France and Germany from 1100 to 1350, just so you get an idea.
As in other places, the Jewish group in northern France and Germany saw the synagogue as a miniature temple. By calling it, quote, the minor sanctuary, the group expressed the greatest possible regard for the institution. This process of transferring the values of the temple and priests to the people as a whole began in the 2nd century CE. But in medieval communities, examine here the way in which people conceptualize a synagogue as a temple and themselves as priests takes on an aspect of social values.
Thank you. So as much as I love Isaac Mayer Wise was really, he understood what was going on in the Middle Ages. They started calling these places temples. And they started saying, we are never going to get to the land of Israel, so we have to make community here. We are not waiting for a 3rd temple, and so we have to make community here. It is in this period, 1100 to 1350, where women and children start showing up at temple, and where we finally can eat. So it took a couple of centuries, but I think it's important for us to recognize that the minute you bring food into the synagogue, something changes. And what we see over the next 300, 400 years is that a sanctuary was built with a table in the back and a bookcase. And in the back of the sanctuary, the rabbi would teach, sometimes all day, sometimes periodically, sometimes only on Shabbat, depending on the economics of the community. It was also the table where the poor came to eat. And I believe that one of the reasons that women and children were brought into the synagogue in this period, which was a period of tzedakah, and a period where not everybody had means, was that somebody had to bring the food and make sure that these poor individuals, some travelers and some who lived in the community, would have sustenance. So we see the evolution of this synagogue already in the Middle Ages as an institution of tikkun olam. There's no mention in the Torah that the house of God should be an institution of tikkun olam. But imagine that in this early period, thousands of years later, after the creation of the tabernacle, the evolution of the synagogue, the transformation of the communities is happening. Recognize that, please? And I put that picture, which I took off your website, because I thought it was important to go with a thriving synagogue. Rabbi Siva, can you find somebody to read a thriving synagogue for us? A wonderful volunteer, you get mitzvah points, and you'll go to the head of the buffet in the world to come. I'll highlight it.
A thriving synagogue readily attracts, involves, and retains members and participants that is financially sound. Thriving synagogues are dynamically heading toward their future. They have a clear sense of purpose and a vision and a plan for fulfilling it. They are on the move, and members and participants are excited about the possibilities for the future of their synagogue.
Okay, so this is from 2020. It was a survey done of Reform. Thank you so much. Tell me your name.
Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse. It was a survey done of Reform and Conservative synagogues. It's new research. Okay, so Temple High, let's see if you qualify. A thriving synagogue readily attracts, involves, and retains members and participants. Raise your hand. Oh, you think so? Okay. It is financially sound. Thriving synagogues are dynamically heading toward their future. Everybody should raise your hand. Look at who you have in charge here. You don't even know how good it is. They have a clear sense of purpose and vision and plan for fulfilling it. Oh, see, those hands went up very quickly. Excellent. They are on the move. And members and participants are excited about the possibilities for the future of their synagogue. Every single hand in this room should go up. That's what a thriving synagogue is. And when you all buy into that definition of a thriving synagogue, you see that we're no longer talking about architecture. Right? What's the difference between a house and a home? A house is a building. A home is what you put inside. A synagogue needs to be a home. No longer are we building an edifice for God, we're building a home for ourselves. And that is a totally different transformative activity. So they did a survey of congregations. Thanks, Rabbi. If you just hang on to that, that would be super. They did a survey of congregations. 83% of synagogues said that they are vital. Surprise, surprise. You know, you're not asking the people outside, you're asking the people inside. 83% also agreed that they are willing to change to meet new challenges. That, my friends, is new. 20 years ago, the statistics were in the 20s. Congregations were unwilling to change. Congregations from the 1950s and 60s and 70s, the ones I grew up in. I grew up in a Jewish center on Long Island, built in the 1950s for suburban community. And you'll see those synagogues were built with small sanctuaries and large religious schools and big drive-throughs. Pediatric drop-off. It was drop-off Judaism. We drop the kids off and we go. I never saw an adult in Sunday school. They dropped us off and they left. And so suburban synagogue architecture reflected the mindset of the move to the suburbs from the cities. And then we got entrenched in that model. Even those of us who built synagogues in the 1980s were still dealing with some of the mindset of the late 20th century. And so one of the things that stagnated synagogue life for too long was that, a lack of willingness to change to meet new challenges. Now, since the year 2000, 31% of congregations, 1/3, have moved location or chosen to deal with no permanent building. That is an outstanding statistic. So if you thought you were unique, I'm sorry. You're very special. You really are. You're very, very special, but you are part of a national trend. Not just here. I mean, yes.
Why?
Why? Because after 2007's financial crisis, after the Madoff scandal, which bankrupted a lot of Jewish institutions, the financial structure of the Jewish community was upended. And congregations, many of them didn't have the endowments that could support the lack of funds. The birth rate in the Jewish community, we have the worst birth rate of all ethnic groups in America. We replace ourselves at 1.5 rather than, all right, so the average age of a Jew in America is 46. The average age in some other ethnic communities is 25. The average age of the people who are part of Hadassah today, when I was growing up, all the moms were in Hadassah. Your average Hadassah member is 80. So you're dealing with a low birth rate. You're dealing with, we've lost 1 million Jews, according to one of the population surveys, people who have just decided not to affiliate, not to label themselves. Anything else?
I don't understand the moving part.
The moving part. Architecture serves a community, right? So congregations are very often will move. We had a beautiful exhibit in the Jews of Los Angeles. We live there part-time now. And they showed us how all the congregations kind of moved where the Jews moved. People move where the populations are. In Virginia, we didn't have very many Jews, so they had to come to us. Some of our members drove an hour and a half each way. Most people won't do that. And so we see that in the Jews of Los Angeles went from Boyle Heights downtown, and now they're building synagogues in the far reaches, you know, where there used to just be ranches, because people are on the move. My own son has moved through Los Angeles so many times and belonged to the congregation. People want to sort of be where the action is, or where the best educator is. And that's also in Jewish texts. Go where the best education is. Go where the best service is. Yes?
How many people are born as Jews, identify supposedly as Jews, but are completely non-identified with any kind of Jewish lifestyle or Jewish organization?
It's a growing number. So there's a new scholarship emerging, which I started studying during the Zoom. One of the scholars is from the University of Virginia, and they're saying that our metrics are off, that we need to be looking at young people who are doing Shabbat dinners and are getting together Jewishly in other ways. Our metrics are off. We shouldn't be judging our community in decline because synagogue membership is down. We should be looking at how Jews today are being Jewish, and if the synagogue adapts well, the synagogue then adapts in a new way. Many congregations are doing satellite activities without a building. So in Washington, D.C., they have a young rabbi who's in charge of just having coffee and dinner with people all over the city. They never walk into the synagogue, but the synagogue is running the programming.
Along the same lines, I think we're all aware of the woeful numbers of American Jews who are not Orthodox, which is a small proportion of American Jewry, that the numbers are somewhere around 20% or less who actually belong to a shul. I know that's the number here in Arizona, and I think those statistics are similar.
It depends on where you are. It can go from 20 to 47%.
So my question was, it seems like the way to attract and to bring all these huge number of Jews who are unaffiliated and are Jewish only in name, to some extent, to bring them back into the fold has to start as a grassroots movement, and that leadership, and this is, I don't expect a simple answer, I'm not sure that leadership has a simple solution to this problem that I consider to be really sad and worrisome.
Right, so I want to get back to the synagogue. You've hit on something, and that is, again, it's our metrics and our studies. So, for instance, Shabbat dinners are up in the Jewish community. Shabbat observance is up. People studying Torah who have never studied Torah before is up. Number of people wanting to be Jewish is up. So, again, it all depends on your metrics. Can the synagogue do it all would be another question. The answer is no. But what we're going to ask ourselves is, what role does the synagogue have to play in the Jewish future? Yes?
I have another question. Has the ability to stream services and stream many of the activities that go on affected people's need to come to the synagogue?
Yes, we're going to get to that, and we're also going to talk about it tonight. Okay, there's another element here. My teacher, Larry Hoffman, who was my thesis advisor, writes in Rethinking Synagogues. In 2006, reflecting on the things that he learned from Synagogue 2000, and I just spoke to somebody who did Synagogue 2000 here, reflected on the atomization of congregations, a legacy of the Protestant Reformation, which emphasized independence from the Church of Rome, magnified in America by the frontier efforts of hyper-individualism. And we are living in a time of hyper-individualism. I want what I want, when I want it. I want to pay for it, fee for service. I want everything to be customized for me. I'll go into the Apple store and I'll make it exactly the way I want it, and I get the color I want, and I got a new phone because my son said, "Mom, you have to have a purple phone." So I think we live in a society of hyper-individualism, but we also have to remember that we are a congregational country. Now, I always look at the glass as overflowing. Sorry, it's just who I am. I am not a pessimist, and I believe in the Jewish people, and I support many congregations. Gary and I belong to lots of congregations in Israel, and I mentor a number of our Israeli colleagues. And I will tell you that one of the things that warms my heart and gives me hope for congregational life is the fact that Israel could have done anything with liberal Judaism, and they chose to build congregations. And now, slowly but surely, we are seeing that an eighth to a seventh of the Israeli population identifies as Reformed Jews. Gary and I did a tour of the north, the congregations in the north, just last month, in November. And the vitality that you see in some of these congregations is heartwarming. So, we're not going to have congregations yet, folks. Keep going. We might posit that this individualism of synagogues is not new. The synagogue is by its very nature a decentralized Jewish space, even when there are efforts to connect them by governing bodies. So, there are people who talk about, the union and all of this. Isaac Mayer Wise invented the union in the 1800s. There have been many people who want to gather congregations together. But congregations are really quirky individual units, run by quirky people. And the loving, wonderful, quirky people, but every group has its own shtick. We talk about, in our congregation in Virginia, Minhag B'nai Shalom. Well, what is that? Our Minhag is almost as important as the Torah, right? Don't mess with the Minhag of a congregation. In the 14th century, in the Torah, he was a wonderful scholar, and he wrote this wonderful book, and he has this phrase in there that says, the minhag of a congregation is more important than the Torah itself. 14th century. What is he talking about? He's talking about the fact that if you walk into a congregation and on Tuesday everybody eats with a spoon, you don't mess with that. So one of the challenges of any new rabbi in a community, and any community that's trying to evolve, is you have to figure out what minhag you're willing to keep and what minhag eventually you're willing to adapt or let go of. There are some people who are so entrenched with minhag that they'll die with it in their hand. And I would encourage people to sort of constantly reevaluate and together in community recognize that this individualism is not a bad thing. So I brought you a text from Midrash Shmot Rabbah, Seder B'Shalach, 11th, 12th century. Sure.
Reader?
Oh, thank you so much.
The court is not
You get a sweet in the world to come.
Good morning, I'm Melanie. When Israel gathers to pray, they do not pray together as one,
but each and every synagogue prays by itself. First this synagogue, and then the next one. And when all the congregations have finished all their prayers, the angel responsible for prayer takes all the prayers from all the synagogues and makes them crowns to place upon the head of the Holy One. Blessed be he.
So what is this text teaching us about synagogues? There is no cookie cutter. Each one is unique. Each one prays in its own way. And people, it's not that people aren't joining synagogues. They're not joining certain synagogues. It's not that people aren't doing Jewish. They're not doing Jewish in certain ways. So what we want to look at is we want to look at this individualism, and I think we want to embrace it. We want to see where people are doing best practices and what's motivating. And in a second, we're going to see what people really care about. Okay, so I like to be positive. I just love being positive. So this is another survey, and could you go to the next slide just so we see when the survey. This is the American Synagogue. It was in the American Jewish Yearbook in 2005. You can go back. Thank you. All right. What should be clear from our survey of recent trends in synagogue life is that no matter how we judge the efforts of congregations as they have negotiated the challenges of the past decades, no fair-minded observer can accuse them of having been moribund, static, or unchanging. I refuse to hear only negative critiques of synagogues. I think synagogues have done amazing things. And I belong to 8 of them at the moment. We're all doing amazing things. I encourage people to belong to synagogues, but belong to as many as you possibly can. Because it is a very important institution. Now, Perlin comes from the conservative community. I've studied with her, I've read many of her books, I own many of her books. She says that synagogues are testing grounds, even battlegrounds, for shaping American Judaism. Think about that for a second. Here we are in God's house, our schmoozing house. And yet, what boards have to deal with, what finance committees have to deal with, is that we are battlegrounds for American Judaism. In our hands is the future of our grandchildren's Judaism. I have 7 grandchildren. I would like all of them to feel that they can find a home. When I go to shul with my grandchildren, it means the world to me. But I want to make sure that that world is vibrant for them. I want to make sure that it's exciting. It's not ever going to be the shul that I went to as a little girl. My earliest memory of a synagogue is sitting in the balcony of a Brooklyn Orthodox synagogue with my bubby, wearing white gloves with pearls and a hat, right? Remember the pearls, those of you who are as old as I am? Blue coat, blue and white hat, and I'm sitting there in the balcony with my bubby, and I look at her and I go, I want to be down there. And she says to me, Emily, you can't. I said, I want to. Well, I got there. But the architecture of that synagogue excluded me. So one of the things that we want to make sure of as we look at architecture and community and the challenges of the 21st century is how all of that comes together. Okay, just hand it to somebody who's going to get rewarded by the rabbi. Synagogues will surely continue to serve as such testing grounds, as indeed they must, given their centrality, thank you, to Jewish life, just as they have responded with creativity and innovation to the altered religious landscape of the past half-century. So, thank you so much. The religious landscape has changed. To deny that is to live in a hole. And so I put on the margin, we will need to right-size our architecture and our technology to match the changing nature of the synagogue post-COVID. Right-size our architecture and our technology. I spend most of my time mentoring rabbis and growing new rabbis, but I see them in different locations. Many of the rabbis I mentor are crippled by the architecture they've inherited. Buildings that are falling apart, buildings that leak when it rains, buildings that are impossible to heat and are drained on the budget. Imagine when these synagogues get rid of this albatross that they're holding on to and can use those funds for outreach programs and Shabbat dinners and free activities for the community to bring people in. So our architecture, I would, if God were here, who would like to be God? Rabbi Capel. If you could be God for a moment, can we have a conversation?
She's a Carmen.
When I leave, she's going to say, it's great that Rabbi Perlin made me God. God, we started out with a house for you. And the house is too big, and it's too expensive. What do you want us to do?
I would remind you that the verse that you began quoting says, V'shachanti b'tocham. Build me a house that I may dwell among them, not that I may dwell in it. So I really want to live among the community, not in a physical structure. I need to be out and about with the people.
So you don't want...
Sure.
You don't want... I chose God wisely. So God, you don't want the structure to limit us.
Absolutely not.
And you don't want it to bankrupt us.
That is for sure.
So as we go out into the world, and we're looking at the future, is the synagogue something that you want us to continue?
I think the synagogue is very important as a physical structure because it is important that the people have a place to gather, be together, see each other's faces, provide that support. But that is not the only aspect of community.
Thank you, God.
Yes. This may sound somewhat challenging, but the issue here, and it goes back to, I think, what Alan said, okay, that we're saying the synagogue, as indeed they must, given their centrality to Jewish life. And I think one of the challenges is, when you mention it here, we need to right-size the architecture, technology, to meet the changing nature of the synagogue post-COVID. I don't think COVID was the big issue. I think the issue is to what extent is the synagogue now, if we have, I don't know what it is, 80%, 60%, 40% of Jewish people not affiliated with the synagogue, then the issue becomes, it's not really central to Jewish life. It's central to a small segment of Jewish people, but it's not. If you're not a member of a synagogue, to what extent do you even know what the synagogues are really doing?
Okay.
Or you see where I'm coming from.
I hear you, but I have the answer. that one I have an answer to. Okay? I'm a historian. And I will tell you that the survival of the Jewish people has never been based on all the people. The survival of the Jewish people, and we can track this. I could sit with you and I could show you text after text after text. From exile, we went to Babylonia. Only a handful of people came back and kept Judaism alive. Most of the people went to Babylonia. People assimilated. You know, Joseph goes to Egypt. He doesn't hang out with the Jews. He's Egyptian. So we know that assimilation exists. We also know that our survival depends on those who hold on to Judaism, and those who actually practice the Judaism, and those who actually live the Judaism. So I'm not looking at, first of all, I don't judge whether or not somebody's Jewish if they belong to a synagogue. Because synagogues really should have revolving doors like department stores. People come in and they come out. My first congregation was only senior citizens. I was 23 years old. And I learned so much from them. Many of them didn't belong to synagogues after their kids were on bat mitzvahs, and then we couldn't get them to leave the temple because they lived there nonstop. People come into synagogue life and out of synagogue life. But the rabbi, the Torah, the institution of Judaism needs to reside somewhere, just like God needs to reside somewhere. So I'm looking at how many Passover Seder's were there in America? How many people are lighting Shabbat candles? Do you know what I do? I go into grocery stores and communities and I look at the Jewish sections. And I do it in Israel too. I want to know how many Shabbat candles they're selling. Now you have a Judaic shop, which already says you're a healthier community, because most congregations don't even have one anymore. Jewish objects. I ask people when they come into my office, like, I'm not a religious rabbi. You know, they want me to wear a collar, like, I'm not religious, Rabbi. And I say to them, how not religious are you? Is there Jewish art anywhere in your house? Oh, yes. Do you have Shabbat candlesticks? Yes. Do you have a Hanukkah menorah? Yes. Do you go to a Passover Seder? Yes. Do you have a Torah or a Bible or a prayer book in your house? Yes. You know, and I'm not going to label those people non-Jewish. It's really, we have to get our metrics right. And we can't, you know, we are so good at crying the vault. You know, people are so good at yelling, oi. I'm positive. I believe that we wouldn't be sitting here discussing this if we didn't have something really valuable. Really, really valuable. Now, you're right. The one thing you are 1,000,000% right. is it's not post-COVID. What did COVID do? Like the plague in the Middle Ages, like the destruction of the temple? COVID was the odds. Okay, Jewish community, get off your tuchus and make a change. It's time for something new. We have to go online. We have to be technological. The greatest gift, people say that I left my congregation before I retired, was the Torah camp. They said to me, Rabbi, what do you want when you retire? I said, I want you to have a camera over the Torah so everybody can see the Torah being read. I wrote my rabbinic thesis on the Torah, my heart is in the Torah, and I left them technology. This was before COVID, right? And so a year and a half afterwards, everybody thanked me. I didn't ask for a gift for me, I wanted a gift for them. They were already technologically ready. Which congregations are thriving? Those that have the technology. Those that care about who's out there. We love you, anyone who's watching. You're important to us. So I think it's really important to start asking different questions. I think we want to ask a whole new set of questions. This is the last slide before we start asking them. I want you to take a look. You can see your chart close up on your page. The reasons for attending synagogue. This is a 2020, it's very real. Because I find it spiritually meaningful is number one. People in America, people around the world are seeking meaning. In Israel, they complain that their kids go to India and they travel the world after the army, and the Judaism is right there. But there aren't enough of our kind of Jews. The only Judaism they see is a strangling Judaism that has no flexibility or meaning in their lives. Imagine for a moment if all we thought about was, you want meaning in your life? You've come to the right place. That's what I want. I want to walk in and feel meaning. We felt meaning last night. We felt purpose last night. We each felt greater because we were together in this sacred space. We brought God to dwell among us. And if there is no community, and there's no rabbis and cantors and educators and Jewish professionals to lead the community, the burden on volunteers becomes unbearable. And remember that our learning, our rabbinic learning, our cantorial learning, our Jewish education, Jewish professional learning enriches the community. I look online all the time about what's out there for Judaism. It's like when you go to the doctor, okay? First of all, when you choose your doctor, do you choose a doctor who's the first one online? I look to see where did they go to school, how are they educated, what specialties do they have? Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Your educator has one of our executive master's degrees, one of the highest degrees in Jewish education you can get, and I would say one of the most respected. Those people are trained to do something different. Not like your doctor says to you, don't look on the internet, Yonko, please, because what you're reading on the internet isn't really medicine. But I looked on this website. Please come to me. Our job, my job is not to sort of just give you a fact on the internet. My job is to live in this continuum of Jewish history and to be able to put an arc on it and to go from one period, you know, we say, Ein mukdam ve'ein muchar b'Torah, there's no early or late in the Torah. I should be able to jump from the 12th century to today with ease, and you leaped with me. We went to France this morning. We spoke to Larry Hoffman, who lives in Westchester, New York. Our job as Jewish professionals, in partnership with committed lay leadership, is to put together a Judaism that is not this linear information. You know, I did an exercise the last year I was in the pulpit with my confirmation students where I let them bring in their laptops. And I gave them a few Jewish questions, and they gave me answers. They gave me answers from Al Jazeera about Israel. They gave me answers from the Messianic Church's website on Judaism. If you don't know how to discern what you're looking at, and so much of the material that I use is not available online. It's on the books on my shelf. So I think we want to be optimistic, and we want to see that we're looking for meaning. Number one, across the board, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, we're all looking for, I want meaning in my life, and I want meaning as an older person, just like I wanted meaning as a younger person. And secondly, because I feel a sense of belonging. COVID taught us about isolation. And people are craving belonging. If we don't tap into this and recognize what Rabbi Buchdahl, one of the most famous rabbis in America, in the past, membership was more of a given, said Rabbi Angelo Buchdahl of Central Synagogue in New York City. People felt that they had to join a synagogue in order to belong and affiliate. Now I would say there's a lot more do-it-yourself Judaism and internet Judaism and virtual Judaism. And I'll tell you, not all of it is bad. Let me tell you the story of one of my mentees, Andrew, who's a last-year rabbinic student in New York. Angela Buchdahl hired him to be the online rabbi of Central Synagogue. He has a congregation of 400 families, online, connected to Central. They meet, they study Torah, they have a bar mitzvah class, he gives sermons, he does all kinds of programming. And he's one of, 9 or 10 rabbis? And his whole job is this online community. As a student, it has been inspirational. They come to services, they meet with him, they call him rabbi. What an experience he's had. Now, did we always think about our online community? You matter to us. We care about you. Do you know what we've done? We've brought in the sick, we've brought in the elderly, we've brought in those who are challenged physically and emotionally. There are many people who have lived in isolation, Jewishly. And all of a sudden, we've opened up a world to them. It's fun. So here are our questions to explore. Yes?
Before you do that, I'd like to go back to your second page on the 2020 fact survey.
Yes.
The last item is public rabbis.
Going back to the 2020 fact survey, the last statistic is pulpit rabbis are aging, and all the data indicates that we'll be facing a major shortage of rabbis. I think we've known that for a while. We know the Cincinnati campus of HUCJR is closing, and we had a rabbinical student who worshiped with us this summer. We're from Temple Beth Shalom of the West Valley. She was here for the summer doing an internship as a chaplain through Banner Health, or Banner Hospitals. And she was with us every week, and she told us that there are 14 students is all in her class in Los Angeles. And the class is getting smaller every year, and she said less than half of them are even interested in being pulpit rabbis. What's going to be the impact on us?
Okay, so that I'm an expert on. I spend every single day of my life dealing with HUC. I'm on 8 committees. I chair one. I'm the only rabbi on the executive board. So let's deal with rabbis. First of all, before I leave, I should tell you one thing. Take care of your clergy. Love them, cherish them, and do not let them go. I could do a love song. Don't let your clergy go. Because we are facing, in America, a national shortage. One of my classmates just wrote a blog. 47% of Protestant congregations cannot get clergy. We're not alone. We don't live in a vacuum. We're part of America. There is a shortage of clergy in America. Why? Because we expect clergy to work 24/7 for less than competitive pay. And people are choosing other professions. So first and foremost, it has to be a partnership between those of us who train the clergy and those of us who employ the clergy to try to right-size the clergy day, clergy responsibilities. There's loneliness out there. I mean, I read all of the clergy magazines. I'm the Rabbi Emerita of a Lutheran church. When the pastor calls me and says we can't get an assistant pastor, we're not training enough pastors. And there are many more Lutherans in this country than there are Jews. Being clergy is a job that hasn't necessarily changed. We want to, I brought for Rabbi Siegel, but I didn't want to give it to her to ruin her weekend. My friend Rabbi Cameras from Cincinnati put out once The Perfect Rabbi, works 500 hours a week, and is always there, and always has a smile, and is never tired. I mean, there's a whole page of The Perfect Rabbi. If we don't change the expectation for clergy and increase salaries, it's going to be a real problem. Now, HUC is working on it. We have all the statistics. We have the largest market share. Part of the problem, one of the reasons we're closing Cincinnati is that classes are smaller. My class had 60 people. Our goal is to get up to 45. 2/3 of our students are still serving congregations. 1/3 are coming out and not. But that's a statistics that is meaningless. All of our students will have 7 to 10 careers in their lifetime. And rabbis are leaving the field for a little while. I will tell you that if you are a rabbi and you're leaving the field now to go explore some other profession or get an extra degree, there's a 25-year guarantee that if you're a decent, good rabbi, you'll be employed. Because there's a national shortage. So I think that what we need to do is we need to make larger cohorts, which is what we're doing, why we're moving from 3 campuses to 2. And we need to revise our curriculum, which we are doing. I was part of the curriculum revision for our Israel program. I was just there with our students in Israel, and they are loving it. Did you love Israel?
I did, but I'm weird.
Many of our students felt that the curriculum needed to be revised, that the whole program needed to be revised, and it's been completely revised. So the college is on top of this need. I also want to invite any of you who are looking and seeking meaning. We see a number of people today who all of a sudden say, you know what? I could live till 100, and I'm only 50. I've got half of my life left. I think I'm going to go study and be a rabbi. So it is my life's work to say to people, if this is a dream that you've had and want to explore, we invite you to talk with us. If there is a PhD who is unemployed, Andrew Rayfeld, the president of our college, says, I want to talk with you, even if your PhD is in astrophysics, because you know what? You may be looking for meaning in all the wrong places.
So, Rabbi, what age should I be thinking about?
We can talk later, but I would never turn anyone away. We lived in a building in Los Angeles where an 80-year-old man was getting his smitha. And you know what he was doing it for? He had started studying when he was 70. His friends in the building were passing. And he really saw himself as the person who would give them their final goodbye. And it was beautiful, because he had had this great career, he was independently wealthy, he had been a physician at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and now he wanted to be a rabbi and be there for his friends. I say that, if you feel that this is a path you want to follow, and it's not just rabbis. We need cantors, we need Jewish professionals, we need educators. A house is a structure. A home is what we put in that structure. And part of our home, just like children shouldn't be running around the house without parents, part of a home is who are the leaders, who's in charge, who's showing up every day to make sure it's all going. So, yes, there's a rabbi shortage, but there's also a national shortage. I always caution people. And I think the pendulum will swing, because what I'm the wife of an economist. There's a market out there. I can promise people jobs. And if you're good, you will get a job, and a good one, and it'll be fulfilling. I know that one of the reasons that Rabbi Siegel wanted to become a rabbi was that I really did try to teach all of my students. I loved every single day in the pulpit. And I teach that to my mentees too. Even the hard days are growth experiences. So we need to build leaders, but as congregants, you need to love leaders and take care of your leaders and nurture your leaders. Oh, and your temple president.
So, I'm going to throw out another challenge. I have a pretty loud voice.
No, people can't hear on loud.
Okay. And I looked at all your questions, and I just heard your comments. And one of the questions I think that's not there, and it goes into what you're saying about we need more leaders and so forth, is where are the synagogues going to have the resources to survive? For example, you mentioned the Central Synagogue, which I'm familiar in New York City. So during the COVID crisis in New York City, obviously the temples were closed. And so one group of stakeholders that I am familiar with are obviously Jewish people that only go to the temple, as I did, over, the high holy days. Well, the Central Synagogue was fantastic, as well as other ones out in Long Island. They had online sessions, which was phenomenal. There was no charge for those sessions. Okay, so when you're mentioning the Central Synagogue is doing all these online programs, I think that's phenomenal. As you mentioned, you express your Judaism in a whole variety of different ways in terms of your identity. But for the synagogues to survive, they have, even though they're nonprofits, even nonprofits have to have money to survive. Doesn't mean they can't be profitable. So when you mention the Central Synagogue, I again have friends who are continuing to do it, even though their temples are now live, they don't have to pay anything.
Yes, so the question is, what is the financial model of the future? I think each community is going to have to look at its own. Central has done phenomenally in donations. I can tell you that.
Okay.
Those people who are people don't really want things for free. We think they want things for free, but they really don't. People who seek meaning are willing to pay for meaning. I think that we are still in a liminal moment of figuring out the financing. What we are seeing though, because we're in the philanthropy world, there is a great reliance on philanthropists. I am very cautious about that, and I keep yelling from the rooftops. One of the congregations we support had a major philanthropist in Haifa. The market in America went down, and they lost their philanthropist. So I think that we have to find a way that congregations are not dependent on any one source, and that congregations can be financially viable. We live in a world where people stop for Starbucks and join gyms and people will pay for what is meaningful. We have to really figure out what the value proposition is, and we need to do it together. So I want to get to my questions, and I promise I will get to yours. Is the synagogue a building or a community or both?
Both.
And what's more important to you?
Community.
Right, so that's a struggle, because when you say community is important to me, we just studied together, I would hope that that's but you know what? Many of us grew up with the place, right? And in many, hamakom is a name for God. Do you know what the word makom means? It means place. There is, for many of us who grew up in traditional settings, a need for a place. When I walk into a sanctuary, I put on a yarmulke. There's something about a sanctuary. And I had a small building, but I never allowed anybody to do anything in the sanctuary other than sanctuary stuff. So I think we're living in this liminal moment where there's a generation that is attached to place, and there's a generation that understands that place is fungible. And what happens when we live in a liminal moment? We seize a challenge. We have to say, okay, we need to thread the needle. We need to make sure there is a place for those who need it, but more important, we need a community. My congregation did not build the building for 9 years. I said you can have a rabbi who builds a community, or you can have a rabbi who builds a building and fundraises. I'm not that rabbi. It's not my thing, you can tell. I like giving money away, I don't really like raising it. So I spent 9 years building community in people's houses. And along, what does it say? We're on your way. That's what I did. I schlepped the Torah in that golf bag. Because community is really important. And then, when we built the building, my kids still call it services. We go to services. Because we didn't have a place, you weren't going to say we go to church. We went to services. My kids still go to services. When I grew up, we went to shul. We went to temple. We went to synagogue. So I think that we are living in a transitional moment, which can be exciting, or you can shry oy. So how many people are excited, and how many people shry oy? Only those who are excited are going to be part of the survival. Because you know what, the Gewalt Schreiers, I could do a whole lesson on people who strike Gewalt. From biblical times, from the complaining in the Bible, because there's a great lesson to do, whining in the Bible. There are so many whining texts and fetching texts in the Torah. So that doesn't take us anywhere. It really doesn't. It just gives a placeholder for those who want to fetch. What does the synagogue provide that all other forms of Jewish engagement and other Jewish institutions cannot provide?
Can you repeat the question, please? We didn't hear you back here.
It's on your sheet. It's the second question. What does the synagogue provide that all other forms of Jewish engagement and other Jewish institutions cannot provide? Yes.
I still say it's the spirituality.
Spirituality.
Yeah. I just don't think you get that from a study group or a Jewish social event or volunteering for the Jewish organization. I think it's the one thing that you feel when you come into the synagogue. You don't get somewhere else.
Could I get a definition of spirituality? Because when we say spirituality, I'm not always sure what exactly that means and how does that bind us together from Orthodox to do-it-yourself Judaism. What exactly is it?
It's a great question. I don't know. I think the answer to that is people are seekers. Humanity was born to seek. What is the most important symbol in the Jewish community, in Jewish life, in Jewish history? The question mark. The Jewish star originally appeared in the Middle Ages on cemetery plots. It wasn't always part of our identity. And the blue and white was really from the Muslim community, which we borrowed. But the question mark, that's our identity. We are the people who ask questions. Spirituality for you may be very different than spirituality from your fellow member. What does Gates of Blue, the old prayer book, which I loved, say in service number 3, in the 300s? I used to know the page number. My house shall be a house of prayer for all people. I think a house of prayer, a house of study, a house of gathering. When we talk about spirituality, spirituality is that individual aspect. It's how, when I step into this communal world as the seeker, what am I expecting in return? When people talk about fee-for-service Judaism, it aggravates me because I come prepared for things, and very often people don't come prepared to accept what the synagogue offers. Somebody said to me, I want to learn more about Judaism yesterday. A brilliant, lovely, sensitive human being who touched my soul. And I don't know enough about Judaism. I said, that's why we say we practice. I don't know enough about Judaism. We bring ourselves and our experience. We're only as good as the questions we ask and what we see. And this synagogue structure, this institution that God gave us, you gave us the synagogue. You gave us a place to gather and ask questions together. At its best, spirituality helps you deal with all the questions of the universe and all the times that life isn't fair. And then the synagogue offers you those moments of joy that carry you over. You know, I'm not a Gevalt Jew. Rabbi Siegel will tell you, I really believe in Jewish joy. I believe that when we are joyous, we're able to get through the tough times. The tough times, which every single person in this room, myself included, we've all had. So part of what we need from community is to help us get through the tough times. Not everybody in this room believes in God. Not everybody in this room prays. But we're all here, seeking something. Yes?
I have a couple of questions, and I
Okay.
hope they all kind of fold in because I've been waiting on one of them. You mentioned earlier, this is a jump back. Oh, sorry. Probably not what you asked.
Okay, this is a jump back question. You mentioned that you turn out a bunch of rabbis and only a portion of them go to synagogues. I want to know where the rest of them go. Are they going to the community?
Yes.
And in what capacities? And then if you don't mind, I'll hang on to this because I have another one.
Sure. They are what we call entrepreneurial rabbis. Many of them are starting new rabbinic initiatives all over the country. Some of them are going into chaplaincy. Some of them are going into the military. Some of them are going to work for Jewish organizations, running Jewish programming for what we now call the unaffiliated. They're doing very exciting things. Some of them are going to get PhDs. It's all very exciting, but they are all going to have multiple careers. So the last associate rabbi I had when in my pulpit had never been a congregational rabbi till I hired her at age 50. She had run a rape crisis center. She had been a chaplain for 20 years. There are many different ways to be clergy. So when people say to me, well, they're not all going to congregations, they might. They might in 20 years, they might in 10, they might end up there. We don't know. We're training people to serve the Jewish community. Here's a statistic that should scare the living daylights out of you. 85% of all Jewish professionals in America will turn over in the next 5 to 7 years. Heads of federations, heads of Jewish organizations. Our School of Nonprofit Management at HUC is overflowing. If people want to be Jewish professionals, do you know there's also a shortage of Jewish development professionals? There is such a shortage in the Jewish community that every person who is unemployed could go and get trained and serve the Jewish community. Because as much as we try Gevalt and look at our undoing, there are still a lot of Jews out there who need to be served.
Don't forget Jewish camps.
Oh, I would never think my grandchildren live in Jewish camp. It's the best thing that we do.
Okay, so the second question goes to your second point there. I'm speaking selfishly and personally here, but one of the things I come for is to connect with all the parts of me, all the Jewish parts that I've had in my life. So you mentioned the throwback. Some of us are older and remember older ways. Some of us need to make contact with that, and I want to know how an ever-changing rabbinate or attitude on the part of the synagogue can maintain both the youth and excitement and vitality that I need as well, and still give me that contact with the earlier parts of me that feel the most Jewish in many ways.
I'm with you. And I love that you phrased it in beautiful I statements of what you need. I think that congregational leadership listens to those I statements, what we need. There are times, because we go to synagogue all over the world now on Zoom, that I know all the melodies. And there are other times that I go to shul, and especially in Israel, because Israel has all new melodies, even for the Torah service, and I feel like such a newbie. You know, it's like, ooh, I don't know that. Part of me doesn't like it, and part of me loves it. I think that Judaism has always been that way. That's what I would encourage us to look at. It's always been that way. When I went to shul with my bubby, it was not the shul that she grew up with. And when I started my congregation in 1986, the worship and the Judaism that we said and practiced is not the same as going on today. We were one of the first congregations in America to sing the Mishabera. And I put it in the service where I felt it should belong as a liturgist. My replacement rabbi moved it. And you know what? It really upsets me during the service. But I'm a good, retired senior rabbi. And I sit there and I pray and I keep my mouth shut and I don't say a word. So I think we all have to adapt. And yet, I think expressing our I statements and finding outlets for those things. The synagogue can't be all things to all people, but it can be a feeder for, so for instance, I have people who have learned everything they could possibly learn from me, and my job as a rabbi is to show them where they can learn outside of the community, or to help fund that outside study. Prayer is such an interesting thing. So let me give you an example of what we call tradition. Some of you will say you'll come to services, and I don't know, the cantor isn't singing the traditional prayer. Where's the cantor? He's not singing the traditional prayer. So people would say to me, Rabbi, I want the traditional Michamocha. And I would go, right, cantor? Which traditional Michamocha? And sing me something that was written in the 1970s. The best example I have of that is the year of my bat mitzvah in the 1960s. This song was written in Israel. Oseh Shalom B'Rama. 1960s. It's a hippie song. Rabbi, the congregation's so new and highfalutin, they're not singing the traditional Oseh Shalom. Didn't even exist when I was growing up. Until I had my bat mitzvah. And I remember the rabbi saying, I don't want that new Oseh Shalom. So I hear your need. I'm going to go on to my questions. I'll take all the rest of the questions afterward. I hear your need, and I think it's an important need. But I think life is about compromise. You're in a very good situation because you have rabbis, you have a cantor who are educated in the full breadth of the Jewish tradition. And I believe in my heart, knowing them, that they will channel those needs. And I would be in conversation with them because I would leave that up to them to make that decision. The fact that you're asking it in this house is what's important. So, synagogues have traditionally housed the Torah and the rabbi offered worship, life cycle, and Jewish education. Is that still what is needed for Jewish survival?
Partly.
What else do you need for Jewish survival?
People who want to survive.
Oh, wasn't that brilliant? We could run all the programs. David's board could make programs from today till tomorrow. People have to want it. People have to engage with it. People have to know it's there.
I feel like having kids that are 22 and 30, part of it isn't about what I want, because we want everybody to start. And so we have to be able to offer their needs. When I talk to my 30-year-old about spirituality, and David asked about that, it means meditation to him. It means a higher power. It doesn't mean God. And so some people, maybe they don't accept that. and then that person may not be here. And so.
But it doesn't mean that meditation and a higher power at 30 doesn't turn into, because of life experience, a synagogue goer at 40.
Absolutely.
One of my most active congregants in my congregation back home is a man who never entered the synagogue. I saw him the day of his daughter's bat mitzvah and never came back till he was 40 years old. He had a life-transforming moment, and he's never left the synagogue since. So the beauty is that there's a continuum, and we live very long. I think we make a mistake as a Jewish community, and I'm a loner on this a lot of the time, in focusing on 20 and 30-year-olds. I just do.
Having children is.
Because people are having children later, and so there are all different ways and needs, and so we need to make sure that there's a continuum of Jewish experience. But you know what? At the end of life, people need this. You know, I have died with so many people, and no one ever said, I want to die alone. And no one ever said, I want to grieve alone in forever. We need to come back to life. And we need community when life is difficult. And sometimes we don't even know we need community. I would knock on someone's door and they would say, I didn't think I needed you, but I do. So I think that you're very right, but I don't want us to focus on 20 and 30-year-olds only. Synagogues have traditionally been defined as houses of prayer, study, and gathering. How might the future synagogue be defined? What do you? Yeah, what? Adding more community.
Adding more community events. But if I may go back to
yes,
the last question, talk about 20 and 30-year-olds. I have a 26-year-old daughter who is on the board of Olami. She goes to Moshe House. She goes to Shabbat dinners at Chabad. This is where she feels connected. And she was here last night because we felt it's important that she share this wonderful experience. So she's very much, we like the Shabbat kiddos every Friday. She's very much into her Judaism, but it's in her way. Like you said, she might come back in 20, 30 years, whatever.
Well, she's already on a great path.
Yeah.
I love what she's doing. We don't have to be all things to all people. We just have to be all things to the people who want us. Okay, so I asked the question, and I know time, I want to be sensitive to time. Is the synagogue still the institution of Jewish survival? If synagogues disappeared tomorrow in America, would Judaism still survive?
Yes.
Yes, but differently.
But yeah, be different.
That's one thing else, okay. Yes, but differently. And I don't know that I can say how the difference is going to look, but we know that we're moving, that we're in that liminal time, which causes a lot of discomfort for a lot of people. And discomfort doesn't have to be bad. Discomfort can be good. It can be a motivator. But we don't know. And we're going to have to make some really good, educated guesses. And so I'll jump out here on a limb and say, as a congregation, for instance, we need good advice. We need to know what models are out there, because somebody else has gone through this, as you said, other congregations who are moving, doing all these things. We need to know what's possible that maybe we haven't thought of on our own, and that's where the future will be, is finding out what are the new things that are possible.
Excellent. And we also need to figure out what we want. It comes back to the I statements. As a community and as an individual. This is what we want, because congregations, as we saw, are individualized. So my answer is some congregations will survive and some will not. And if you want yours to survive, then hopefully today it just gets you thinking about who are we and how do we fit into this Jewish continuum, and how do we make sure that tomorrow is the best that we can possibly make it. Because it's based on what I said last night. We're given the ingredients. It's what we do with those ingredients. But you're right, we need more collaboration. All the latest writers are saying that the isolation of congregations could be our undoing. The conversation doesn't need to be necessarily about a merger. The conversation needs to be about what's working for you, and looking at that across the spectrum, and then saying what will work for us. So a congregation, number one, is a building or a community?
Community.
Yes.
I've been trying to say this for half an hour.
I'm sorry.
But I'm stuck here in the back, but that's fine. I don't need it. For me, when we had the situation about the sale of the building, I know from what I heard that people were going crazy. Great, what are we going to do? And from that very moment, I said,
It's not about the building, it is about the community. It is about us. It is about us connecting, and we will find a way.
So I think that's a beautiful closure. We're about to start the book of Exodus. The book is completely a book about wandering Jews. We never really settle down. We spend our whole time wandering. And the only reason that we survived for 40 years in that wilderness is because we did it together. And we did it with Torah. And we did it with guidance. And so you're very right. That community. We had the tabernacle eventually. And we schlepped that tabernacle. I can't even imagine what it was like to say, okay, you're in charge of the big poles. You carry the curtains. But imagine, everybody felt invested. Everybody put the synagogue up together and took it down together and felt God's presence together and felt community together. So ultimately, it's that togetherness and that sense of, do you want a Jewish future? Do you want Judaism to survive? I can't tell you what the institutions are. I can just take you on a journey. And I thank you for the privilege of taking this journey with you this morning.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Perlin. I know that one of the things I love is when we study together. I think that as we answer questions, we come up with so many more questions we want to dig into. And this can be the beginning of a real conversation. We continue together, and I will invite you to do that together with me. And continuing this evening, I think that we'll be touching on a lot of the ethos behind a lot of the same that we're talking about the synagogue this morning, and focusing on Jewish leadership and the rabbinate and what has been and what is ahead as well this evening. So I will go through details for that in 1 second. I also wanted to acknowledge our colleague, Rabbi Debbie Steele, who's been with us this morning. She's at Soleil. Thank you for being present with us. And also our beloved cantor emeritus, Sharona Fowler, is here. And she's going to be with us this evening as well, helping us with Abdallah. Cantor is pointing out the blessing journal. There's one there. Oh, there's not one there. There is one there. There's one there. And this evening, 7 p.m., we have wine and cheese. Then we'll do Havdalah together and continue with our fireside chat that I'm so looking forward to.
With a real fire.
Well, of a sort. Speaking of technology. But we're maybe blowing our big surprise. Okay, so that is 7 p.m. this evening, and then tomorrow morning there's the chance for Torah study with Rabbi Perlin, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning during religious school. We'll be back in this space this evening for wine and cheese, as well as tomorrow morning for Torah study. Again, thank you so much for being present. Thank you again, Rabbi Perlin. Shabbat Shalom.